Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McKusick, and we're back for part two of the discussion of the Ravens 2026 draft priorities. I'm joined again by the great James Ogden. James, how you doing?
I'm good, Ken. How are you?
I can't complain, James. I will be forever jealous for the fact that he got to announce the Ravens' fourth-round draft pick last year of Teddy Buchanan. James, I'm sure that was quite the experience. And I remember you telling me you couldn't talk about it ahead of time. You told me this after, so you didn't tell me. But there's also you might have been jinxing it to just in case they traded the pick away.
Yeah, we were. It was interesting on the day. We were sort of thinking it would happen, and when we got there, they did confirm that it would happen regardless. So there was a little bit of talk about that pick getting traded, but they were then, and there was also the potential for that. We now realize that there was the potential for one of those picks to be Shedeur Sanders, which would have been interesting.
That would have been
cool. Would have made me infamous for a while. But anyway, it was an absolute dream. It's funny because people say it's a dream come true, but I never really imagined that I'd be able to do that. So it's not like a dream come true. I never thought I'd be able to do that. It was amazing, and the Ravens were brilliant, and the UK Ravens have been really good to me over the years. And I got a recent meetup a full Teddy Buchanan jersey with the draft card signed by Teddy, which is cool.
Oh, that is super cool. That is I understand why you want him to have a Hall of Fame career now. That's a very cool item for your sports memorabilia collection.
Yeah, Teddy can't do any wrong. He's a phenomenal player. He's going to be a Hall of Fame. He's going to be great.
Well, we're going to have a podcast coming up in the next 2 weeks or so. This is you'll be listening to this on Monday, February 9th, hopefully. But in the next week or so, we'll have a podcast with some people from the UK. I was on their pod, and one of them, Thomas, is joining me to talk about how the Ravens market in the UK. And I think it's very important for the Ravens with their limited geographic area to reach fans in the UK. They've done a great job with James. And when we were over there for the game against the Titans a couple of years ago now, great crowd, great meetups, lots of fun, great people. The Ravens need to aggressively pursue international marketing given their limited geographic footprint within the Middle Atlantic region here in the U.S.
Yeah, and they have a thriving fan base in the UK, as you saw from when you came over for the game. Like it's a really great place for them to start, and I'm glad that they did, and they've been really, really kind to us over the years of the different kind of things they've done for us. So we're sort of continuing that relationship, and would like to see them do lots more for us over the years.
All right. Outstanding. So let's continue on from where we were. The last position we talked about was safety, which was number 8 on my list. I believe it was the last one. So I think we probably have a couple of matchups now, and we move down a little bit down the way. My number 7 is at running back, but your number 7 was something we've already talked about also, right?
7 was inside linebacker, which we have talked about, right?
And then who do you have at 6?
6 is D-line for me, which I don't think we have.
Oh, my. Okay. Enormous difference there, but please take me through your logic on that.
So this is a tough one, right? Because if Madubuike doesn't come back, that raises this much higher on my priority list.
Where would he without Madubuike? Because I'm still ascribing a fairly low percentage to that.
Okay, so if it's without Madubuike, I think I would move it up to at least 4, possibly even 3. So it would move at least a couple of spots, maybe 3 spots up.
Okay, so this will be our one big difference, but kind of walk us through how you see that.
Right. Yeah, good. I think for me, so it's about right. We're talking about draft capital, and if Madubuike comes back, the challenge here, right, is that I think the thing I didn't take into consideration, which I should have done. I did the rankings and then looked at the potential cap casualties. And Broderick Washington is a very likely cap casualty, which means that the depth of the position is very thin if you're ascribing a low percentage to Madubuike coming back. If Madubuike does come back, I do think that the Ravens at the top end in terms of their 1 technique and their 3 technique have 2 of the best in the league. in Travis Jones and Madubuike. And so if Madubuike comes back, and Jones is in the fold, you're looking at an interior of the defensive line that is exceptional. And so you're then looking at depth. And depth is important on the defensive line, more important than in other positions, which is why a depth need of this kind raises it kind of up the bar for me reasonably high, even though I think Madubuike and Travis Jones would be one of the best pairings in the league, because they don't have much beyond it. John Jenkins is better in a role where he's a backup, not doing many snaps, backup one technique, basically not playing as the main defensive lineman for the Ravens alongside Travis Jones. And so there's that situation. There's not a lot outside of that. Like, I like Peebles, but I also don't necessarily think he's the guy that a lot of people think he is, and are frustrated that he's not getting made active. Like, I'd like to see him play more, but I don't think that you can count on Aeneas Peebles as a huge part of your rotation of your defensive line. And so if Warwick Washington isn't there and he's cut, and Madubuike isn't there, then this goes way higher, because I think you probably raise it up to like 2 or 3 at that point, because the problem is Travis Jones. I need Travis Jones back in his one technique role, and I need somebody alongside him who is going to take some of the attention away from Travis Jones, who, time and again, if you tried to single Travis Jones, it was a disaster zone.
Right.
But he just saw so many double teams and he was great against double teams as well. So it's not like you need to be able to release him to be able to be better. And so they need to find, if they don't have Madubuike come back, they have to find a 3 technique, and it probably has to be someone drafted quite highly, especially with the 3 technique position being one that is important.
I will take the other side of that coin. And it's always good when you have disagreements, texture, you're hearing both sides of the argument. I think the Ravens are fairly agnostic at this point to whether they draft a 1 or 3 tech, because I think Travis Jones can play either position. I think we saw him play some outstanding 3 tech this year. He's a monster when paired up individually against a guard, and with the right-handed nature of most teams, it presents a big matchup problem for them to figure out how to get a double team on him as a 3 tech. So you have to sacrifice your tackle. Then you've got an edge against a tight end. You have to really worry about how you're gonna deal with that. So Madubuike is the big domino. I'm not allowing myself to believe that he might be back. Let's put it that way. Okay, I'm not allowing myself to believe it. Then the name we haven't talked about yet is CJ Okoye. He has 3 years of runway left. Now, he's not a super young guy because he spent 2 years on the Chargers practice squad. Chargers. But he's got 3 years left, and I think, he played well enough to hope that there could be some improvement there, and he's certainly got the size you would want. I like Jenkins in terms of his play last year. I thought was pretty decent, but I think they now have to pick up 2 players. They need, and Brent Urban could be on speed dial. There's other options they have. Josh Tupou could be on speed dial again, but they probably need 0 to 1 UFAs at the position, and they need 1 to 2 draft picks. But I think the linchpin of what I'd say here is that this is a place for potential draft economy by substituting a nose tackle for a 3 tech because you believe Jones is the guy. Now, or Jones can be a guy who is that penetrating 3 tech. Now, he won't be a penetrating 3. He'll be an overwhelming 3 tech. The Ravens will present unbelievable size problems to opponents if they get a 1 tech of 330 plus, which the Ravens are in love with. So presumably they would pick one. I think they can, if you can afford to be agnostic and go to the, get a Deion Walker, right? I'm trying to think the nose tackle who was drafted in the 4th round this last year.
Yeah, I think you're right, Deion.
Yeah.
Kentucky.
That's the one. If they get a player like that, for example, I think they could potentially save draft capital. They have so many needs on day 1, day 2, that might be a potential savings. But IDL for me is number 2. And I think I would agree that part of it is that I'm not really allowing myself to believe that Madubuike can be back. But it's a big need, certainly if you assume he is not back.
Yeah, I think you're right, and it's a really great point about Travis Jones that you could bet on him as a three technique, and then I think the thing that's important, the thing I feel is important for me, is getting him a running mate, whether it's a one or a three,
Yes.
who takes some attention at times. That's the thing I think, and you're right that doesn't necessarily have to be a three, right? In fact, the greatest thing they could do is pair another versatile guy with Travis Jones, and then you've got all sorts of problems as an offensive line, because they could line them up all over the place. So I think it'll be, yeah, I think that's an interesting point. And I do think if Madubuike's there, I do think it lowers the importance to an extent, but only to an extent, because the defensive, like, I think one of the reasons this team failed this year was because they didn't have the requisite depth on the defensive line.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was pretty obvious going into the season that was a gamble they were making, and it just didn't pay off.
Well, it didn't work out as soon as the Madubuike injury hit, that's for certain. And then they had 4 nose tackles active for a number of games. They set all kinds of weight records. Okay, I'm projecting them as weight records. The Ravens refuse to do any of this sort of analysis in terms of backing this up. But there's no easy source to get that. I'm not blaming the Ravens PR department for this, believe me. But I do think it would be interesting to see, was this the heaviest group ever? I think it was the heaviest group ever of 3 players on defense in week 4 against the Chiefs. And I think when they had the 4 all active at the same time, and it was 1,421 pounds between them roughly. I think it was probably the heaviest 4 ever. So remarkable that, and in a lot of ways, Orr had a tough season. I'm not going to say he didn't deserve to be fired really, but he did some nice things in terms of adapting to the personnel he had and dealing with the defensive line, and at least getting good run defense out of it after changes had to be made of that type. Was good. Alternating the use of, finding a different use for Travis Jones where he'd be more effective down the stretch, also very good.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I feel like he had a lot of very unique challenges that he found some ways around. Like there were trade-offs that ended up hurting him in other places, but I agree with you. I felt like he did find some interesting ways around some of that stuff. And Travis Jones was definitely one of the play of Travis Jones was a huge boon to this team down the stretch.
Okay, so your number 6 was defensive line, and
Yep.
my number 6 was wide receiver. So what's your number 5?
5 was safety, which we talked about.
Okay, so my number 5 is tight end.
Which is my number 4.
So okay, so we'll be able to hit this. Now, we start with the biggest question of all at tight end, which is, I have no idea if the new coaching staff really is interested in folding Ricard in the same way. That said, I think it's likely for several reasons. One is there are market frictions which allow Ricard to be signed cheaply using the VSB dollars. So there are other players who can get that, by the way. But he could, Ardarius Washington would be a good one to also have the money go to, but he can get it. And if he does, then he would be an inline tight end if they wanted him there, and he'd be, and that would obviate some of the requirement of replacing Charlie Kolar, perhaps in the same way. If you're going to use Charlie Kolar as little as a receiver as they did, then you don't really have the need to replace that inline guy. But I think, honestly, I think the most likely thing is the organization and their DNA is with Ricard as a fullback, and they'll keep him there. And it will be a new thing for these Peyton disciples to play with a fullback. And that's what they've got on offense right now in Lombardi and Doyle. They have a couple of guys who have not used the fullback regularly in their coaching careers.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because I'm not necessarily in the business of loving everything John Gruden says, but I loved the description when he came to camp and called him the straw man, because he's the straw that stirs the drink of the Ravens offense.
Reggie Jackson, yep.
Exactly. And Pat Ricard is like he is. That's such a great definition of his meaning to the Ravens. And like I do think that I think they're going to I think they will keep him, and I think they will find up. I think this coaching staff, it does feel like, especially with Doyle, from what I read about him, it does feel like he'd be up for the challenge of incorporating that into the offense. Like, I think he's like one of the reasons they brought him in, and Minter mentioned it in the press conference, right? And there was a twinkle in his eye. So I think he sort of knew at that point who it was going to be, about finding an innovative offensive coach. And so it's a challenge to incorporate him that I think they'll probably relish. Like I said, I've got tight end up at 4 just because there's just I feel like there is it's not just depth. Like this is like Doyle and Lombardi are coming over. They're going to want to run. Like they will, I'm sure, run with plenty of packages where it's a tight end and Ricard. I'm sure they will want plenty of packages where it's two pure tight ends. And the Ravens don't have that on the roster right now, right? They have Mark Andrews. Like they have to find another tight end. And I also think it's reasonably high for me because I think you can find the type of contributor they need at tight end through the draft. Obviously, tight ends take a couple of years to develop, but you can find really effective blockers like early in their careers at the NFL level, and a guy who has some potential receiving upside. And there's a few options in this draft that tick those boxes. So I do think that they are likely to draft a tight end this time around. I would love it if they could find a way to get Charlie Kohler back on the team. I think I'm a huge fan of his, but I think he probably ends up being too pricey in the end, right? I would be surprised if, everybody sort of was shocked when the Ravens gave Nick Boyle what they gave him, and when Josh Oliver went and got the kind of money he got. It's just what happens when you find a guy who can block like that. And Kohler was really good down the stretch, so I just think he will get paid, and it will be the Ravens have to start this process again, which they've done many times before.
Yeah, they're highly desirable players, and people don't really seem to get that. There's a lot of derision of the Ravens in terms of the Boyle, the excitement and the announcement of the Boyle extension. But the fact of the matter is, teams, particularly that don't have a fullback, like to line up their tight end, use them as a fullback, and they don't have anybody, and they want somebody who can do both things. And guys like Boyle and Oliver are highly, valued in that regard, and Kolar will be too. And I think those are outstanding comps. I think it's in the Ravens' DNA to make multiple late round tight end draft picks, or a mid and a late. And I think they've been outstanding at getting early production from those guys. Most notably Andrews, who set what still stands as the all-time Ravens receiving record for yards per target in his rookie season in 2018. So I think they'll get two guys. It'll be re-sign, UFA or draft. If they go UFA, I think they're really almost looking for a specialist. I don't think they're really looking for a receiver. If they re-sign Kohler, they're going to bite down and pay the money. I don't really see a word where they re-sign Likely, but maybe you have a different viewpoint on that.
No, I'd be very surprised if they brought back Likely. Yeah, I also don't think he necessarily fits this version of the offense that's being brought in. Like I don't think it's the same. Yeah, I think they'll be looking for more of an inline guy.
Okay. All right. So let's move on. My number 4 is the next one's left. Do you have what was your number 4 was tight end?
4 was tight end. Yeah.
All right. So I guess I'll start us off with the edge at number 4, which I wouldn't doubt you have significantly higher. The Ravens are very short at outside linebacker. They have 2 building blocks in Green and Robinson. Robinson's entering year 4. They've got to think about an early extension for him. If they like his game. I love his game. Doesn't grade out as well on PFF, but he does a lot of the peripheral things well. And he was asked to do, like Green, way too much this last season in terms of playing time when he was healthy. The rest of the group, they need to reform it from UFAs, draft, and re-signings. Draymond Jones, I guess I'll throw it over to you. Is that a player they have to prioritize as a re-sign before they consider where they spend the amount of draft capital they spend?
I think they're going to have to, and I think they're going to have to spend, close to 10 million AAV on an outside linebacker. Like that is what they're going to have to do. Whether it's Jones, whether it's which I think would probably be a 2 or 3 year contract likely with Jones, or it's a 1-year rental with a Clowney or a Mack or something like that. They're gonna have to find the money to spend, I think, that on experienced UDFA. Like I'm not in the camp of spending 20 million on Trey Hendrickson. I don't think. I'm also not in the camp of trading 2 first-round picks for Max Crosby. Yeah. So there's few options out there. So outside linebacker is number 3 for me. So very similar. I think there's not that many options out. They are going to have to draft an outside linebacker, possibly even 2 in this class, and one of them is going to have to be a high pick. I don't think at the moment I wouldn't nail on an edge rusher at 14, but it has to be it has to be a day 1 or day 2 pick on an edge rusher, I think, which is an unfortunate place to be after doing that the year previously. But they're just in a place, as you mentioned, where the cupboard is bare. And as much as I like Tavius Robinson's game, and I liked the flashes of potential that we saw from Mike Green down the stretch, and I like his game overall, you just can't go into the season relying on those two. Obviously, you're gonna, for a Super Bowl contender, they're going to have to add to that room in a big way, and it's pretty obvious. But I think there's going to have to spend a lot of draft capital on that position.
First of all, I'm okay with Draymond Jones, and if they get it done at $10 million a year for either 2 or 3 years, I'm on board. I'm comfortable with that. And then I think you still will take a day 1 or day 2 draft pick, and I would not mind also getting a veteran pass rusher from the bargain bin, like they've done so many times successfully before, who can give you legitimate pass rush juice, and they have just shown a unbelievable consistency of being able to find that guy over the last few years with Houston and Clowney and Van Noy and others. I trust them to find an older player from that group to do it. But I still think you need all of that. You really need 5 guys. And the biggest thing I'm going to see next year is that Mike Green is made into really a situational pass rusher. I don't want to see him have an early down run role that mitigates what he can do in terms of, flexy, bendy, rested Mike Green.
And I think, so this is one of the benefits of the change in the coaching staff. I think Mike Green is a huge potential beneficiary of that if they spend the kind of resource they need to on the edge position, because the defensive line across the board, including the rush backer in that, has never been as good as when Anthony Weaver was setting the front in Baltimore since Suggs retired anyway. And so bringing Weaver back really helps with that. I think Minter obviously has put players on the front, sometimes limited players on the front in positions to succeed. And so you've got a situation where I do think Mike Green can really benefit from this. And I agree with you. I want to see a more reduced role for him next year. And that doesn't mean that he can't expand back. And I think this first year will help him down the line in his career to expand back into a larger role, because I do think he can do that. But at this point, I totally agree. They have to get guys in. I think it'll be interesting, right? Because the bargain bin is the place they've gone in previous years for vets, but the Clowney deal was a bit bigger, right? It wasn't quite the bargain bin when they signed Clowney. It was a little bit more, I think, wasn't it?
But I would still consider that it's the top end of the bargain.
I know what you mean.
It's not a vet min deal. Yeah.
No, and I think that's the thing for me, is that I think you'd have to. I feel like I want to have a bit more of a sure thing in the bargain bin.
Okay.
And so I'd spend a bit more money, I think, in the bargain bin, and maybe spend more draft capital.
Exponentially more when you go from Jadeveon Clowney coming off a bad year, he still thinks he's got juice, to Khalil Mack coming off a good year, who's 35. I have a lot more fear of really paying money for the veteran there, as opposed to just having to be. And maybe Clowney would be the guy again coming back. He's still got something, and maybe he could be with if she's playing next to Travis Jones, and they're trying to double team Travis Jones with the offensive tackle, and it's all of a sudden Clowney against the tight end. I'm loving that idea.
Yeah, absolutely. They've put the challenge is, right, they've put themselves in a position where they don't have enough depth over the years. They have consistently had enough solid depth at the position to not have to worry about this in terms of in free agency. Mm-hmm. Of course, they've always been looking for that star off the edge that they could bring in through the draft, but they've always had 2 or 3 guys.
Hi folks, the Super Bowl is here, and MyBookie is where you can turn your bets into bankroll. Are you scheduled to go to the Super Bowl party and you don't want to be there? Yeah, I've been to that party too. Managing your portfolio of wagers through the evening can be your ticket through Super Sunday without getting caught up in your brother-in-law's political rhetoric. Whatever your take on the game, MyBookie has both side and prop bets to make your Super Sunday a lot of fun. That's why I use MyBookie. You've probably heard them talked about on Jimmy Kimmel Live for their deep board of prop bets. These bets become some long-lasting memories, including watching Refrigerator Perry score in Super Bowl 20 at 100-1 odds. If there's ever a time to get in, it's right now. One account, one wallet, bet the spread, live bet the second half, hit the casino during commercials. It all lives in one place. Go to mybookie.ag now. Use promo code Ravens and get your first bet covered up to $500. If it doesn't hit, use your bet back bonus token and run it back. Don't just watch the big game, make it pay on MyBookie.
Let me tell you about the online cannabis company that's changing the game, Mood.com. They created an entirely line of functional gummies, 100% federally legal THC blends, discreetly delivered right to your doorstep. And here's the best part. You can get 20% off your first order at Mood.com with the promo code RAVENS. Now, I've tried a bunch of their gummies myself. Each one's totally unique. The Sleepy Time gummies knock me out right away. They help me unwind fast, leave me refreshed the next morning. The Epic Euphoria gummies, they're perfect for when your day just isn't going the way you want it to go. What makes Mood special is how they pair the THC with natural herbs and adaptogens. You won't find blends like this at any local shop. They've got gummies designed for focus, relaxation, clarity, even energy, all made from cannabis grown on small, family-owned American farms. No pesticides, no shortcuts, just high-quality weed you can trust. Plus, Mood backs everything with a 100-day satisfaction guarantee. So head on over to Mood.com, check out their amazing selection, and don't forget to use the promo code RAVENS at checkout to save 20% off your first order.
Sometimes it can feel like everyone else has it together in their love lives. Whether married, dating, or single, the truth is most of us are still figuring out and finding our way. February is a tough month, whether you're single or married. You may feel pressure with all the talk of flowers, candy, stuffed animals, relationships, and dating. Therapy can help you identify what's dragging on your relationships and find ways to brighten them again. Whether it's for individuals or couples, it's an opportunity to identify what's getting in the way and help remove obstacles to happiness. That's where BetterHelp comes in. BetterHelp has quality therapists who work according to a strict code of conduct and are fully licensed in the United States. BetterHelp does the initial therapist matching work for you so you can focus on your therapy goals. A short questionnaire helps identify your needs and preferences, and their 12 plus years of experience and industry-leading match fulfillment rate means they typically get it right on the first try. If you aren't happy with your match, switch to a different therapist at any time. With over 30,000 therapists, BetterHelp is the world's largest online therapy platform, having served over 6 million people globally, and it works. With an average rating of 4.9 out of 5 stars for a live session based on over 1.7 million client reviews. Sign up and get 10% off at BetterHelp.com. That's BetterHelp.com. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp.
Coming through the pipeline that have been able to take those solid reps. And the problem is what you're looking at is, say, like the type of guy that they would have coming through in that situation is a guy like Boye Mafe, who is going to be a UFA in Seattle, who's a solid edge rusher. Like, he's been good, he's been solid throughout his career. He is nothing spectacular, but someone is going to pay Boye Mafe a lot of money to come and be their edge defender. And the Ravens have never had to have that. They've had the luxury of not having to do that in the past.
Yeah, they've lost that guy. They lost Pernell McPhee under pretty much those circumstances that
exactly.
described.
Yeah. And the year before they lost Pernell McPhee, they had Pernell McPhee coming through. Like, that's the thing, right? They've had that guy each time, and then they've lost him, and it's just they just don't have that. The cupboard is completely bare, and so they've backed themselves into a corner a bit where they are going to have to spend significant off-season resource on the position.
Right. All right. So I think we're in basic agreement on that, and I had it at 4, and you had it at 3 then for edge.
Yep, I did.
Okay, so we have 2 to go, I believe, to discuss. So what's your number 3 position?
So my 3 was outside linebacker.
Was outside linebacker. I'm sorry.
What's your 3?
My number 3 is at corner. And so it's a very old group. It's obviously one of your top 2 because we haven't discussed it yet. Wiggins enters year 3 as the leader. I'm basically assuming that Humphrey is either moved to safety or he's gone. One or the other. I don't really see him. I don't see them keeping him on the current deal to play cornerback. It could be they re-incentivize his remaining $7.4 million or something, and they figure out how to deal with that differently. They might reduce his cost that way. But I think, if he does sign on to play safety with the Ravens, he'll go to that position. They'll have an incentivized contract and whatnot, and then very, very likely they will need him at some point. And we've seen this happen with Jimmy Smith. They tried to move him to safety, and then they needed him a corner, and he moved right back to corner. And in fact, he was pretty much their number 2 right cornerback, or their starting right cornerback again as soon as that happened. So the Ravens just don't have very much beyond that. Martin in Tampa, should both make the team. Longerbeam and Kone will both be attempting to resurrect their careers after rookie injuries. Awuzie could be re-signed, but it's going to be real money to do that. And, the number of $6 to $10 million contracts the Ravens need to hand out this offseason is scary in terms of, how they might accomplish it. So anyway, I think it's a high draft need, a day 1 or day 2 pick.
Yeah, I think so too. So it's my number 2. It has to be. You're right. The challenge is the Ravens also have not been great in the bargain bin with cornerbacks over the years, right? It's the opposite conversation to edge, and they've been okay, right? They struck gold.
Ronald Darby, they struck gold with. And
that's true.
Awuzie. Rock Ya-Sin, they got the wrong guy.
Yeah, this is the thing, right? They've picked the wrong guy, I feel like, in the bargain bin, and it was good this year. Yeah. But that was an example of good roster building, right? Which is that they picked 2 guys out, and one of them worked out, which made sense. But they're going to have to find somebody else, as you mentioned. I think, I think really highly of Nate Wiggins. You can't love every pick the Ravens made, and I didn't love that pick at the point at which it was made. There were other players I would have preferred, especially at that position too. And so there's a challenge. I think that he had some rough stretches this year. I think he's more than talented enough to make up for that. And you've seen him develop over the 2 years, and some of the things that I saw on tape at Clemson, I've seen him develop. And so I do have high hopes for him as a solid to good corner in the NFL. So they've got a guy there that they can use. I don't think he's ever going to be the ceiling that they talked him up to be when they drafted him. I don't think he's ever going to be a top corner in the league.
Would you bet over under on 1.5 a Pro Bowl for him in career?
1.5 Pro Bowls.
I said a half, but let's set it. Let's set it at 1.5. Let's set it at 1.5.
If it's 1.5, I'm probably taking the under.
Okay, and a half, you're taking the over?
Probably, yeah. I think he'll make a Pro Bowl. But I think it'll be when he puts it together in a year. But I don't know that he's ever going to reach the ceiling that his athleticism could potentially allow him to reach. And I don't care, to be honest. Like I really don't. Like, he's a solid corner, and they've got that positioned out. There'll be a problem when they come to pay him because someone's going to overpay him more than likely. But I do think I actually think he potentially could be better in this scheme than he was in the last scheme. But I do think I think there's space to improve on that. And that's why it's high for me, because I do think you could be on the lookout for a guy, especially at 14, who is the top cornerback on the team. Like it is open. That position is open. The top corner on the team, and a guy who potentially gets paid down the line is open. And it also makes the decision when, I know the decision to pay him is down, Nate Wiggins is down the line a little bit, but when that decision comes around, it's a little bit easier if you drafted a guy at 14 this year who can be the guy in waiting. So that's why I think it's really high for me.
I'm with you on that. The after this year is the 5th-year option decision. Now, the Ravens don't typically sign their players early. They did with Kyle Hamilton in terms of getting him signed before his 4th year, right? Before his 4th year.
Yeah.
But they certainly could end up 5th-year optioning Wiggins or not potentially. I see a lot more potential. And I go back to his days at Clemson. Yeah, there were problems, but in some ways he was a little bit similar to Evan Warrior, that there were some traits and some elements of coverage that I thought makeup speed was a bigger part. But then I look at the results and I'm like, how can you not like the kind of yards per target and the other metrics he had when he was at Clemson? His yards per target were one of the lowest. He was the only guy from that draft. There's a whole bunch of guys. I'd love to know who you love better at number 30 than Nate Wiggins, because there's a whole bunch of guys in that draft that met one criteria or the other, but they didn't really. Nate Wiggins was the one for me in the entire draft who passed both the sniff test in terms of the state tape and combined that with outstanding coverage metrics at the college level. And he didn't have a bunch of interceptions, it's true, but he was the guy. He was my number 1 corner in the draft.
Yeah, to me, the challenge with him is there's been consistent. I think we've now consistently seen him struggle in the same areas that I saw him struggle at Clemson, and there has been some improvement. But I think for me, there have been these stretches where he struggled, and I just don't know that he's ever gonna. I think we're now a couple of years into this now, and I don't know that he's gonna. Like, don't get me wrong, I don't hate the kid. I think he's a really good corner. I just don't know that I don't think he's ever gonna make it to top dog on the team corner. That's just where I am.
Am I hearing that you would put this guy in like a mild disappointment category, the way you'd put Odafe Owe, who was
I don't. Yeah, I don't think so. I think I would put him in. I think for where they drafted him, I don't think it's a disappointment. It's a first round pick where you've got a guy who can hold down the cornerback position and play well for the 5 years of his rookie contract if he takes the 5th-year option. Like, so I don't see it as a disappointment. He is what I expected him to be. The guys I would have, and so this is a tough one because he's not totally proven yet that he can play outside, but I just preferred Cooper DeJean. And I still do think he can play outside. And I think he's shown this season flashes of being able to do it. And I had Cooper DeJean very high on my board that year. Okay. And so I would have taken DeJean. The guy I really would have taken, but we weren't in position to, would have been to trade up for Quinyon Mitchell in the same way that the Eagles did.
Okay. Yeah.
And that was my guy in terms of an outside corner. But obviously that's a trade up. You can't really project that.
I had honestly concerns about Mitchell in terms of the quality of play, the quality of opponent that may or may not have been fair. And obviously Mitchell has turned out to be an outstanding pro corner. So there's not a question at this point, but Cooper DeJean is the more fair one because he got drafted out in the low 30s by the Eagles, right?
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's move on. I know we're getting towards the end of the rope for you, but let's go to the number one.
So number one for me is interior offensive line, which I presume is for you too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So all we got left to discuss.
It's a mix of all kinds of things for the reason this is number one, right? It's need because hopefully they don't bring Daniel Falele back. I really hope for the kid, to be honest. I prefer him to get an opportunity somewhere else, to be honest. So that's one big glaring hole on this team. I think it has been proven in years where Lamar has had solid to good guard play that he has excelled. He excels in all kinds of different ways, but I think he reaches a different level when he has solid interior offensive line play, when his interior pocket is not as compromised. And so I think the position itself raises to a higher importance with the Ravens because of Lamar. And so there's a glaring need. And then I think also they should be looking to upgrade Voorhees. Like I would understand if a new coaching staff got in, saw something and gave him a bit more of a chance and gave him some longer rope. But to me, I would also look at upgrading the left guard spot as well. And so when you're in that situation, it really does sort of implore you to target the position high in the draft, because I think you have to get a young guy in. I would prefer that they got a vet in as well, to be honest. But and in some ways the vet, you could get a slightly cheaper vet where you could get someone in as some depth, but I think they have to I'm done with the Ravens not prioritizing the guard position specifically in the draft. In terms of in the first couple of days, and I know they drafted Emory Jones, I think late in the third this year. So, but I think and then there's the Linderbaum conversation, of course. Maybe I'll let you start with that.
Okay. So first of all, Voorhees, let's talk about him for a second, because he got 2 years of runway left, which is his biggest asset at this point. He has not played well. He probably did not play even as well as Faalele. Faalele did not play well. I don't really want him back for some of the reasons that a lot of people have about him, but I think that it's grossly overstated how bad Daniel Faalele was this year based on how important the blocks were that he missed. It's a case of he misses mostly run blocks where he forgets that he has to block someone by moving into level 2, or he just does not have the mobility to get it done. That limits your offense in a lot of ways that I don't like. But I think also he could be a backup you bring back. The problem is he's going to convert to being directly a backup. And I actually think somebody's going to pay Daniel Falele. Now, when I say that, John Simpson money, kind of thing, not quite maybe that much, but I think somebody is going to say, wow, that guy, he can move people when they, they really try and run power and they don't try and ask him to do too much. So I think that's a possibility. Let's move on to Linderbaum. Linderbaum, I don't want to overpay for. I've gone on record a number of times about this. I think he's worth something considerably less than $18 million a year. Given his pass blocking, that is a significant concern. I don't buy any of the crapola that people have been spewing about better guard play would make him better. Maybe, but he needs to be the elevator, not the elevatee in this argument here. And Linderbaum so far hasn't really proven that he can pass block effectively in the NFL. So I'm willing to go for a slight overpay, provided one thing happens, and that is that the Lamar extension is completed. And I'll say again, I've said this many times on the show, but the first time I've said it to you, James, is that it's not a matter of the money. That they could afford him either way by deferring Lamar money and void yearning and whatnot. It's about making sure that Lamar Jackson is around if they're going to make the investment in Linderbaum, which I think will be an overpay. So they need to make sure Lamar's here for the next 5 or 6 years before they put the money into Linderbaum for 4 years, say, which it probably is the expected term of the contract, I would say. And I do think, regardless of this, there's no incentive for Linderbaum to take less than a market-setting contract. I think there'll be suitors out there, and all it takes is 2 to really bid that number up to an absurd level. So that's where I am on this.
Yeah, I think I'm similar. I think the challenge with Linderbaum is, and we can't project too much until we see what the offense is. And while I think that sort of gap versus zone is a little bit overblown at times, I do think when you're starting to talk about these millions and like a few millions here or there in contracts, what you are probably looking at is a team like San Francisco thinking about what they can do with Linderbaum in space. Because of how much zone they run, that then starts to put them to the point where they're comfortable getting in a bidding war for him because they know that they can weaponize him more than even the Ravens have, to be honest. And so that's where the money then gets too much for Linderbaum. And while the Ravens will be a heavier zone team, especially a heavier outside zone team now, moving forward, it just seems unavoidable based on Ledford and Doyle's past tendencies. I still think there'll be multiple. And so I don't think that they raise to that level of like, I'm Kyle Shanahan and I can see what I'm going to do with Linderbaum in my scheme. And so to me, it just makes there is no incentive for Linderbaum to sign a contract now, right? So I think he'd be foolish not to see what's in the market. And when he gets to see what's in the market, the Ravens are going to get outbid. And so I think they are going to be looking for a new center, which is why interior offensive line is like even higher, because then there's another need, another position you have to fill.
How about definitely not a first-round pick on a center a second time, because they really lost out on the market frictions. And no fifth-year option, no reasonable franchise tag. I mean, they've got to do what every other good team did. Get a second or third round center. That's where Creed Humphrey was drafted, and he was an unbelievable player.
And this is the thing that I think has frustrated me over the years is that, and it might be just that it's guys I liked, but I feel like I've liked a number of guys, interior offensive line, that have gone on to sort of work out, that got picked early day 2 or like second round, early third round. It's often the sweet spot for those type of players. Sometimes those tackle guard conversions where they're not going to be able to make it as a tackle in the NFL. That's where those guys go. And the Ravens just constantly eschew that position in those areas of the draft. They have just waited constantly and tried to develop those guys. And when you had Joe D, I understand that. And maybe they make that calculation again now they've got Ledford in the building. But I do think that there's too much. That interior offensive line is just too important to the success of this team. They have to spend high draft capital on it, and that's why it's number 1 for me.
Well, we're both at number 1. Would you be upset if their second and third round picks went to that position?
No.
Okay. Would you be upset if their first round pick goes to that position at 14 without trading down? Because I'd be mildly upset by that. I think you're going to have a real hard time getting value at 14, and then you're stuck with the lack of friction.
So this is where we get into the options of where I think they should, what they think they should do at 14. If it's Maui Goa, I'm fine with it because there's potential upside of tackle down the line, and he's a tone setter. Like he's a you bring him in, it changes the tone of that offensive line, and so I with the power that he has, so I can get behind it being Maui Goa at 14. I don't think he's going to be there, but I can get behind it.
Ione,
the other guy is Ione, right?
Yep.
Who I really like. Like I really like Ione. He's a special pass protector. He's awesome when he plays with independent hands. There's some deficiencies in the run game, but I can live with them. And so as a pure guard prospect, he's the guy. The problem is if he's the guy, there's some talents in this draft that could fall to 14. And so Ione feels like, as much as I really like the guy, at 14, he feels a bit like the backup prize. And so you'd be much more comfortable with a trade back and still get Ione, right? I think is where I would be.
Okay, and I'd be okay with that too. This team has a lot of needs, so picking up extra picks in the mid rounds in particular would make a lot of sense. And the only way you get an extra mid round pick, generally speaking, is to trade your first back about 3 spots, 4 spots, whatever it might be, to pick up maybe an extra third. I guess it would be out of that. So I'd be okay with that. I'll give you 2 hypotheticals. The first one is Falk, the edge rusher. Would you want him ahead of Ione?
Yeah.
Okay. And number 2 is Caleb Downs drops from number 4, and all of a sudden the Ravens are in the dilemma they seem to be in annually about a great safety being available, who is not the position of need identified by the organization.
Yeah, I would go with Downs in that situation. I would find it really hard to pass Downs up. Falk is interesting, right? Because I think Falk solves a couple of problems, because I think you could, not necessarily, he's not too guy, you can't split him in 2, but I think he's very versatile and would be able to, and in some ways is better when he plays more inside than he plays outside, in the stuff I've watched. So I'd be really intrigued by Falk as an option who would be really versatile, and the Ravens like that. So that's a guy who would probably be above on my board than Ione. But it's tough because I really like Ione, like right. I really do.
I can tell.
But it's right. It's the thing, right? I can't forsake Downs for a really good guard. Like I just can't. I don't think.
It's too much of an opportunity, and they didn't do it to their credit. They didn't do it with Kyle Hamilton. To their discredit, they did do it with Derwin James. To their discredit, they took Queen over Xavier McKinney. I mean, come on, it's just a ridiculous. In retrospect, it's absurd. Anyway, so here's the last thing I want you to finish with. Most likely, game 1 combination, and you can use any combination of a draft pick, a free agent, or whatever at the 3 positions. I still think it's probably the 3 guys on the roster are the most likely to be there week 1, which is really not great. But that Bullock would be the most likely center, Emory Jones would be the most likely right guard, and Voorhees would be the most likely left guard. And I know that's not what anyone wants to hear, but you still could have a player that's getting ready to play at that point.
Yeah, I think. So I think it will be Voorhees, Bullock, and a draft pick.
So Emory Jones as a backup still for this year?
At the moment, yeah. Not necessarily. Like he very likely he beats Voorhees out in camp. Like I think he could. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he played left side.
He did. He played both. I'm sorry, college. He played both last year for the Ravens. I'm sorry.
He did play both for the Ravens. I think he played left. Anyway, I think I think very likely he beats Voorhees out. So maybe I put it between the 2: Voorhees / Emory Jones, Bullock at center, and a rookie at right guard.
Okay. All right.
How about
you? Well, that's the 3 I have are Voorhees, Bullock, and Jones. But I think that they will get a replacement, at least one of those players in the draft, and they probably will get a free agent replacement for one. So while each of those guys is the maximum likelihood player at those 3 positions, that 2 of them will still get replaced. if that makes
That
sense.
makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah.
All right, James. Absolute pleasure talking football with you as always. Tell folks where they can find your work and tell them about your outstanding draft guide again.
Thanks, Ken. So my draft guide is released every year in April, late April, a couple of weeks before the draft. It's a Ravens-focused draft guide, so give you lots of evaluation on players and evaluate players as best I can. I've got what I think is a good process. I'm constantly evolving it, but it also gives you a drafted Ravens comp for every player, and will give you a nice big summary of how they will fit with the Ravens on each of these top prospects. And then you can also hear me on the UK Ravens podcast every week with others like Gordon McGuinness, and then you can also read my work on Red Star Baltimore, which is my site, and on Russell Street Report. And I'm on X at NFL Ogden.
All right. Other folks out there, if you don't follow James, foolish, but at least follow him on Twitter so you can learn about all his elements here. It's a lot to digest when there's such a long list, but he promos them regularly, just like I do on in terms of the podcast we put out. James is always a guest we want to have on more, particularly around draft time, and I'm sure we'll have you on for at least a couple more shows, including one of the draft previews. Hope you can join us for some of the live stream of the draft this year again.
I'm hoping so, Ken.
All right, James, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.